Hello and welcome to the Musical Instrument Investigator. Today we are on the French auction portal website, Informal, and we're looking at an auction by Vichy Encheres. So Vichy have a set of 3 auctions coming up, the sale of quartet instruments as we've covered in the past. So this is the first one of those these auctions. This is due to kind of finish on the 30th of November, so that's the live auction date. This is obviously based in France. The buyer's premium is 24%. If you're buying outside of France, then check all the specs about shipping, etc., and import fees, etc., but they do a lot of international shipping, so I'm sure that's probably not a problem. There's 340 lots in this auction. This is probably going to be the easiest one of all of them. Some of them are just, as I've said in the past, very lengthy, like 450, 500 items, and it is a bit tough to go through. Even when you do love musical instruments, it does get a little bit difficult, so do bear with me, and without further ado, let's just kind of crack on and see what we can find. So here's some books on violins, the Yalovec book, etc., pretty normal. The Hammer book there on Italian instruments. Here's some volumes on violin making, Venetian instruments, etc., Rene Van's Universal Dictionary of Luthiers, Ciro Moschella, Italian lutherie, Serge Boyer book on 19th century French violin makers, other volumes on lutherie here, Viome book on J.B. Viome, Giovanni Acunero, more kind of interesting books about lutherie and Annibale Fagnola, etc. There's an invoice from Chanot and Chardon for a Rouget violin. There you go, that's interesting. Invoice again for Francois Tort bow, that's interesting. And then another one for an Italian viola by Marconcini, and another one here for a Postacchini violin there, so they're quite interesting. I like some of these old documents, so that's something a bit different. But let's dig into the pardon me, the actual instruments. 20th century Mircore violin there. Not particularly exciting on that one. Lebert violin, once again we're back in that standard zone. But I like the size of the photos that come up as standard, that's quite handy. Violin made around 1900 with a Galliano label. Once again, pretty standard there. We'll just try and blitz through. Remy violin, Mircore, mid-19th century. Doesn't look too bad, €400 estimate. 20th century Mircore violin, 358. Pretty standard trade stuff for that. There's a violin from the Lamy workshop there. Not too exciting to me, but someone will like it, I'm sure. German violin, early 20th century, head replaced, 357. Interesting. Another 20th century Mircore violin with a Breton label. I'm sure it will sell. Another one, workshop of Lebert. Nasty kind of bass bar crack there. It's unfortunate. Mircore 20th century violin there. Label of Cressa and French. German violin there with a Strad label, quite a long length of back, typical kind of trade instrument there. Colin Mazat, they're getting very popular these days. Not too exciting, that one. Another 20th century Mircore violin with an iron mark of Nicholas Ayn, 357 back. Another Lebert Humbert instrument there, quite figured back. Another Mircore violin, Grenier label. Another Miracle violin, Matthew label. Another Miracle violin, Strad label. Here's something a bit more interesting. 18th century violin, cut, lengthened on the back, head replaced, various restorations including a break on the sound post, on the back potentially, 359mm. Let's have a quick look. Oh, there, it looks like the sound post crack on the back, so that's a bit of a write-off, but it looks interesting. There's the extension, a bit horrible, but maybe worth investigating for someone, not for me. 20th century violin with a Montagnana label there. Another Miracle violin with a Dennis label, the same. Violin by Francois Salazar, Miracle around 1840. Another Miracle violin. Now a 19th century violin with Francisco España label, 360 is the back. And nice half-size violin, Amédée Dudouin workshop. Another JTL violin there with the Danacosta label, very interesting. 19th century Miracle violin with a Presenda label, traces of worm. Actually quite a nice back on that, it's quite interesting. €600. Yeah, it's quite nice, nice wood. Yeah, that's slightly more interesting than your normal, so that's good. A few bows, German school violin bow from around 1900. So, German violin bow from 1950. Violin bow by Pierre Cugnot, circa 1870. Bazin school violin bow. Hey, Francois Lot violin bow stick. Cello bow from Gilles de Holt's workshop, 2000. Violin bow by Prosper Colas, circa 1900. German 20th century violin bow from the Bausch school, silver mounted. German school cello bow, circa 1920. On to the next page. Émile Francois Houchard bow. Simon school violin bow there. Morizon violin bow. Charles Alfred Bazin violin bow. Violin bow by JTL. German school violin bow. Dominique Poisson violin bow. German 20th century bow. And Morizon violin bow. Half size bow there by Morizon. Violin bow from the school of Pajot when it loads up. Viola bow from the Brazilian school, circa 2005. Violin bow from Pajot school, and Morizon violin bow. double bass bow from the Usha school, and a Morisot violin bow. German violin bow from the end of the 19th century, Klingenthal with a Hopf mark, pretty standard fare. Another Miracle violin there, Bertoloni label. Another JTL violin here. German violin, early 20th century with a Galliano label. Violin by Poirot. Miracle, kind of mid 19th century. Actually, let's have a quick look at that again. The 20th century Miracle violin, Strad label. Violin from the French provenances, or provinces, in fact, not provenances. Yeah, looks interesting. 362 back. Miracle violin around 1850 with a Matthew label. Half-size violin with original neck. German violin, earliest 20th century. French violin from the provinces, 18th century, missing part of the eye there, and it's lost a lot of varnish there. Violin made in the Labert Humbert workshop there. The violin by JTL. Half-size violin there from Miracle. Actually quite nice. Miracle violin around 1900. Nothing too outrageous there. French violin, provincial thing, Strad label. 20th century Miracle violin with a Viome label. French violin, 20th century, unassembled. Yeah, it's part way through. 20th century Miracle violin with a JB Viome label. Louis Roussel violin made in Miracle. Violin from the Labert Humbert workshop. A violin from the JTL workshop. Oh, interesting decoration on the back. Another JTL workshop instrument there. Bit of bird's eye on the back. 3/4 Miracle violin. And a Labert Humbert violin. Labert violin bow. Violin bow by JTL. Morisot violin bow. And Morisot violin bow. Roger Francois Lot violin bow. Brazilian made cello bow, circa 2015. Francois Lot violin bow. And onwards, more bows. Violin bow by Pierre Cugnot in Amaret wood, they say. Interesting. Violin bow by JTL. Bazin bow here. Lot School violin bow, circa 1960. German violin bow, stamped taut. Morozon violin bow. Violin bow from the Bazin workshop. Cello from the Bazin school. Cello bow, even. Violin bow, JTL. Another JTL bow there. A Bazin violin bow. Another JTL bow there. Violin bow Duhaut. Cello bow JTL. Cien Bazin cello bow. And Cien Bazin violin bow. 20th century German viola bow. Another Bazin bow there. And some more instruments. 20th century Miracle. Another Miracle with a Viome label. French violin, late 19th century. Remy violin, made in Miracle. Violin by Breton. Miracle violin, made about 1930. 20th century violin with Le Marquis de l'Air mark. Half size Miracle cello there. 20th century Miracle violin. Violin of the Charles Jean Baptiste Colin Mazin. €600, refinished table. German school violin. German violin, early 20th century. Violin. Interesting. German violin, early 20th century. Another Miracle violin there. Violin from Eastern Europe. It's actually quite interesting in a way. 19th century German violin, that Hopf type thing. German violin, early 20th century. Experimental violin, early 20th century, with a Solani label. '20th century Miracle violin with a Viome label. Another Miracle violin with a Viome label. Another Miracle violin, Bergonzi label. Miracle violin with Jura label. 20th century violin with a Capelli label. This one's a bit more my thing. French violin from the Chapuis school. €2,000 to €3,000. Seems maybe a little high. Bazin cello bow there. And a Lot violin bow when it decides to load up. And a bow by JTL violin bow. A Bazin violin bow. 3/4 cello bow by Bazin School. JTL violin bow. 7/8 cello bow from the Bazin School. A keyed violin bow stick with sights and knob from Kino Huri. Interesting. Violin bow from the Pajot School, about 1850. Marc Lebert violin bow, circa 1930. Morizot half-size violin bow, circa 1950. We're thinking about loading pictures there. CN Bazin cello bow. 20th century Mircore viola bow, even. Kinohuri or Ushar violin bow, circa 1890. Morizot 3/4 violin bow. We seem to be in a odd loading point at this time. Violin bow by JTL. A violin bow from the workshop of Charles Nicolas Bazin, when it loads up at some point. Here it is. That's good. And a violin bow mounted in nickel silver from the Bazin workshop. And a Francois Lot violin bow. A viola bow from the Pacat School, circa 1840. A violin bow from the school of Joseph Gauder, circa 1850. German 20th century violin bow mounted in silver. Not sure what is happening to the internet today, but it's not happy. Cello stick of the Pacat School, an ironwood. A Bazin violin bow there. Okay. 20th century violin bearing the Chapelle Viome label. Good condition. Mircore violin, early 20th century, bearing a Strad label there. 19th century violin from the school of Didier Nicolas. 3/4 Mircore violin. Mircore violin, first part of the 19th century, but with a Mantoy label. Violin by Alexis Malin, Mircore around 1820 to 1830. Lost its scroll eye there. 20th century Mircore violin from the Cousineau kind of workshop or house, whatever you want to call it. Violin Lebert Humbert. Another 20th century Mircore violin with a Strad label there. Another violin from the Lebert Humbert workshop. Late 19th century Mircore violin, probably JTL. Modern Hungarian viola there in good condition. 20th century German violin there. Another Lebert Humbert violin. Miracle violin, about 1900, JTL. The 20th century Miracle violin, the Tononi label. Violin, late 19th century, in a Maggini model. Miracle violin, early 20th century, Breton. Half-size Miracle violin. Violin by JTL. Another Miracle violin by JTL. Violin by Lebert Humbert. French violin, early 20th century, sold by Emile Boulanger. It's very dark, the pictures on that lot for some reason, I don't know why. Violin by Lebert Humbert. We can look at all these estimates now and then look back in 30 years and see that all these instruments are now estimates of 20 grand or something like that. Violin probably by Didier Nicolas, made in Miracle in 1795. And a Lebert violin bow. Violin bow by JTL. A double bass bow, School of Picat. JTL violin bow. Violin bow by Cugnot. And a German school violin bow, circa 1920. Violin bow from the Tort School, circa 1800. German 20th century violin bow by Weishold. Charles Nicholas Bazin violin bow, circa 1880. When the pictures decide to load again. Stick from Jean-Dominique Adam, signed. 20th century Miracle violin bow there. Bazin School violin bow. Cello bow stick from the Bazin School. Violin bow stick from the School of Simon. Marcel Lapierre violin bow. Violin bow stick from the Pajot School, circa 1850. Georges Emile Bargenet violin bow. We're thinking about the pictures there. German cello bow mounted in nickel silver. Marc Lebert violin bow. Roger Francois Lot cello bow. German violin bow, circa 1950. This is interesting. 6 parts of bow sticks with the marks of Picat, Le Fleur, Le Noble, Vorin, Lamy, Fatigue, and broken head 3/4 of a Francois Lupeau. Interesting, €300 estimate on that, but yeah, interesting enough. Not seen a lot like that before, to be honest. Violin bow from Herman's Workshop, 1970, A. Herman. A JTL violin. A Bazin School violin bow. Musical violin, early 20th century. Another musical violin. JTL musical violin. '19th century musical violin. Another Lambert violin. Another 19th century musical violin. Another provincial violin, newer table, 360 back. Interesting. A JTL violin, musical. 20th century violin with a Bernadelle label. German violin, early 20th century. 19th century German violin. 20th century musical violin with a Magini label. 20th century musical violin, Bernadelle label. Another violin by JTL. Violin from the eastern countries at the end of the 18th century, some restorations. Interesting. '20th century violin with a Rinaldi label. 19th century musical violin with a Breton label. 20th century musical violin with a Albani label. Violin made in the JTL workshop. An old violin case, interesting. Musical violin with a Viome label. This is not happy. Another 20th century musical violin with a Lupo label. Another 20th century musical violin. Another musical violin. Another JTL violin. Lebert violin bow there. A Bizarre school violin bow. Oh, there's a note there. French buyers, this lot is subject to special conditions. Okay, interesting. A Lebert violin bow. Violin bow from the school of Simon. A Morizot violin bow. A Lebert violin bow. Another Lebert violin bow. A JTL violin bow. Seems to only have one picture for some reason. A Bizarre school violin bow. Violin bow from the Picat school. Violin bow from the school of Simon. Francois Lot violin bow. Violin bow of the Bizarre workshop. A Morizot violin bow. German school violin bow. So, thinking about it again. Morozon violin bow. No, it doesn't want to load this one for some reason. There we go. A Bizarre violin bow. Another JTL violin bow. The Bizarre violin bow. Mark Lebert violin bow. Francois Lot violin bow, and a Bizarre violin bow. And the pictures decide to come. We're having real trouble here, and I don't know if this is the pictures are too heavy or the internet connection's not good, or a combination of both. A Thomasin double bass bow stick there. A Poisson violin bow. Got some more instruments here. Another French violin. Basically something, if it's not in Paris or Mirecourt, it's just in the provinces. Small size violin, JTL Workshop. 20th century Mirecourt violin with a Breton mark. Mirecourt violin around 1870, School of Grandjean. 20th century violin with an Ordonne label. '19th century violin. Traces of restoration and worm. 20th century Mirecourt violin from Gustave Bazin label. Mirecourt violin. Interesting purfling. Mirecourt violin, early 20th century. Viotti model, apparently. 20th century Mirecourt cello. French violin carrying the label of Camille Mays, 1938. German violin, late 19th century. Ooh, interesting head there. That was unexpected. Another JTL violin there. 3/4 violin by Charles Claudel. Violin by Didier Nicolas. 19th century violin with a Castello label. German violin, early 20th century. Violin from the Lebert workshops. 3/4 Mirecourt violin. French violin made around 1710, 1715 from the Bouquet school. Oh, interesting. Some missing, it's needs a bit of repair work there, but curious nevertheless. 20th century violin, iron mark of A. Delivet. 19th century Mirecourt violin. Violin by JTL. The violin bow with the Le Toscan label. Violin by Francois Pillemont, made in Mirecourt around 1840. Fairly good condition, it says. And a bizarre school violin bow. Seems to be the bows which have trouble loading, so they must be just very high kind of file size. Violin bow by JTL, made for Kuznel. Francois Bazar violin bow. Violin bow by JTL. A Roger Francois Lot violin bow. A Marc Lebert violin bow. And a Bazar violin bow. Looks like it needs a bit of TLC. Francois Lot violin bow, mounted in ivory and silver. A stick from the Picat School. This one has special conditions as well, apparently. Violin bow from the workshop of Frechner. Violin bow by JTL. A Mayer Picat School violin bow. Roger Francois Lot violin bow there. Whole load of buttons and bits for bows. A Morison violin bow. A violin bow from the school of Martin. A Louis Bazin violin bow, signed Vanelli. Some other kind of bits and bobs for bows. German violin bow, signed C.H. Enel. A violin bow by R.F. Lott, mounted in nickel silver. Modern industrial cello, bearing the Luths label. Violin made in the workshop of Alfred Moritz in Dresden. Violin by JTL. Violin JTL. German violin, late 19th century. Very nice, interesting back on that one. Carraros, violin made in 1976. 18th century French violin, different restorations on that. '20th century Mircore violin with a Strad label. Mircore violin, early 20th century, Nicolas Marchant label. Schuster violin made in Marknikirchen. A violin from the German school, early 20th century. Violin made in the JTL workshop. The French violin, early 20th century. A Miracle cello there with a Bergonzi label. The French violin, late 18th century. Quite nice. Cello from the German school. Oh, I think we just looked at that one there. Violin JTL. Miracle violin, early 20th century. 3/4 Miracle violin. A violin of the 18th century. The label Mast. Double bass there, 19th century, late 19th century. Small double bass there, traces of worm, it's unfortunate. 20th century cello, amateur work. Three-quarter violin there, Miracle. '19th century violin with a Nicholas Sumutra label. Another double bass there with the Paul Hilaire label. A few more pictures on this one. A leather cello case. 18th century wooden violin case. '19th century violin of the German school with a Lask label. And then, the last page. A Miracle violin, Lebert workshop. And another JTL workshop violin. And a 20th century Miracle violin. And then the last lot here is just some more buttons, ferrules, bits of bows. So there we have it. That was the entirety of the first of 3 auctions for Vichy Encheres. This one finishing on November the 30th. I'll put a link in the description, check it out. A few interesting things in between the sea of French trade stuff, but that is this kind of auction. So it is what it is, and basically join us next time for the other 2 videos, which I think have even more lots than this. That's hopefully a bit more diverse than this one, but still, yeah, interesting stuff nevertheless. Some good old French instruments, some other anomalies as well. So yeah, have a look, and thanks a lot for watching. Bye. Many thanks for tuning in to the Musical Instrument Investigator. I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please like, subscribe and turn on notifications, and watch out for the next video coming soon.